He never noticed her, not once in 6 months behind that bar. But the night she tried to walk away, the Mafia boss finally looked up. And from that moment, she wasn't free. She was his obsession. Before we begin this story, may your heart be blessed with peace, love, and everything you dream of. If you believe love always finds its way, even in the darkest places, make sure you're subscribed. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my beautiful people are joining from. Now, let's begin. The neon red lights of Club Sangre bled into the Miami darkness like an open wound. Inside, everything pulsed with money and menace. The bass thrumming through walls, expensive cologne mixing with top-shelf liquor. The air thick with secrets that never made it to sunrise. And yet, amid all that dangerous glamour, there was a girl who moved like a shadow. Teresa Sanchez, 26, worked the quieter end of the bar, the section where VIPs rarely ventured unless they wanted to be forgotten for a while. She kept her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her white shirt somehow staying crisp despite the heat and chaos. Her job wasn't complicated. Pour drinks, remember orders, stay invisible. It was the staying invisible part she'd perfected, standing behind polished mahogany in a world where being noticed by the wrong person could get you killed. When Frank Morales walked through the club, she looked down. Not obviously. Not like the others who suddenly found their phones fascinating or their conversations urgent. She just dimmed. Like a light sensing a storm. He was impossible not to notice. Tall, broad-shouldered, always in dark suits that probably cost more than her yearly rent. Silver rings catching the red neon every time he moved his hands. People said he'd taken over Club Sangre from his father with nothing but ambition and a willingness to do what others wouldn't. They said he smiled twice a year, and when he did, someone usually ended up bleeding. Frank Morales didn't need to raise his voice to command a room, he just had to exist in it, and everyone else rearranged themselves accordingly. Teresa had worked for him for 6 months. He'd walked past her bar hundreds of times, sometimes close enough she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive that made her pulse race. Not once had he really seen her, but she had seen him every night, watched the way he conducted his empire from the VIP section, noticed the rare moments when exhaustion flickered across his face before the mask snapped back. And she was in love with a man who didn't know she existed. That Friday night started like any other. Teresa arrived an hour before opening, stocked her station with practiced efficiency, checked the inventory Miguel would verify later. She'd heard Frank had been in meetings all week, the kind that happened in back rooms with men whose names you didn't say out loud, the kind that meant everyone in the club walked a little more carefully. At 10:47 p.m., the main doors opened with a bass-heavy thud. Two men in dark suits entered first, their eyes scanning the growing crowd with the systematic awareness of people paid to spot trouble. Then came him. Frank Morales. The club's energy shifted like prey, sensing a predator. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they quieted. People straightened. He moved through the space with the confidence of a man who owned not just the building, but everyone in it, calm, controlled, dangerous, in ways that didn't need explanation. His watch caught the neon. His expression gave nothing away. Teresa felt him before she saw him, that familiar tightening in her chest she'd learned to ignore. She busied herself wiping down glasses that were already clean, kept her eyes on her work. When he passed within 6 feet of her bar, close enough she could hear the low murmur of his conversation with Marco, his right-hand man, she didn't look up. It hurt every single time, but she'd learned to smile through it, to pretend the invisibility was a choice. 20 minutes later, another presence appeared at her bar. Teresa, you got a second? Miguel Santos leaned against the polished wood, floor manager's tablet in hand, his easy smile a sharp contrast to the tension that seemed to follow Frank everywhere. He worked the club floor, managing the organized chaos, and he'd been one of the few people in 6 months who treated her like she was actually there. Need to verify your liquor inventory before the weekend rush really hits. Teresa smiled, grateful for the normalcy. Sure, everything's logged, but I can walk you through it. She pulled up the digital checklist. We went through 3 bottles of Macallan last night. Mr. Morales had guests. Miguel scrolled through his tablet, shaking his head. Man drinks whiskey like it's water. Must be nice having business meetings that cost more than my car. He glanced at her with mock seriousness. You ever accidentally poison his drink? Just asking, for legal reasons. She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that made her eyes crinkle and her shoulders relax for the first time in hours. Miguel, if I poisoned every difficult customer, I'd be out of a job. Fair point, he grinned. But you gotta admit, the man tips well but smiles never. Maybe he's got reasons, Teresa heard herself say, surprising herself with the defense. This world doesn't exactly encourage trust. Miguel studied her for a second, something shifting in his expression. You know, for someone who barely talks, you notice a lot. And then, because the universe has a cruel sense of timing, Frank emerged from the VIP section at that exact second. He didn't stop immediately. He didn't call out. He just went still, like a wolf catching an unfamiliar scent. The sound of her laughter cut through the club's noise and hit him somewhere he didn't have armor. Light, genuine, alive in a way nothing else in his world was. Frank hadn't heard that sound in this place, not directed at anyone, and definitely not meant for one of his employees. From where he stood, maybe 20 feet away, he watched Miguel leaning casually against her bar, watched Teresa's face transformed by something that looked dangerously close to happiness. Her eyes sparkled under the neon. Her smile was unguarded, real. Something in his chest went tight and sharp and completely foreign. Jealousy. Raw and possessive and irrational in a way that should have sent up warning flags, but instead just burned. Marco, always 3 steps behind him, noticed the change instantly. Boss, the Castellano meeting. Frank didn't answer. His gaze stayed locked on Teresa Sanchez, the bartender he'd deliberately never looked at directly, suddenly the only thing in the room he could see. Everything good? Marco tried again, his voice carefully neutral. No, Frank said quietly, his tone carrying the kind of cold that preceded violence. Who's that man at her bar? Marco followed his line of sight. Santos, Miguel Santos, floor manager, been with us 18 months, good employee, clean background check, manages inventory and… Not for long. Boss? Get him away from her. Frank's voice dropped even lower, the command absolute. And find out everything about Teresa Sanchez, everything. 6 months. Teresa had counted every single one of them, marked by the rhythm of her hands polishing glasses, the weight of Frank Morales' presence in a room, the ache of being invisible to the one person she wished would see her. She arrived early every shift, an hour before the doors opened, when Club Sangre was just exposed, brick and silence, before it transformed into something dangerous and beautiful. Her station became an extension of herself. Bottles arranged by height and frequency of use, garnishes prepped and covered, ice bins filled to exactly the right level. Precision was survival here. Mistakes got you noticed, and being noticed in Frank's world was a coin flip between reward and ruin. You're making the rest of us look bad, Carlos, the other bartender, told her once, but he said it with a smile, because Teresa had that effect on people, quiet competence that earned respect without threatening anyone's territory. The club filled like a tide. By midnight, the bass would be rattling her ribs. Expensive bodies pressed 3 deep at the main bar, while her corner stayed mercifully calm. She memorized orders after hearing them once, anticipated needs before customers voiced them, moved through her space with the efficiency of someone who understood that being good at her job meant staying employed, and staying employed meant she could keep existing in Frank's orbit, even if that orbit never touched her. Miguel Santos appeared most nights around 11, tablet in hand, easy smile cutting through the tension that lived in Club Sangre's walls like smoke. Inventory check, he'd say, or boss wants the VIP section ready for a party. And they'd talk. Real conversations about nothing important. He treated her like a person, not furniture, and she was pathetically grateful for it. From her bar, She watched Frank's empire unfold in real time. Men in suits that cost more than cars. Conversations held in corners where the music couldn't reach. Handshakes that sealed deals she'd never understand, that probably involved things she didn't want to know. The club pulsed with money and menace in equal measure, and Frank conducted it all from the VIP section like a king on a throne made of violence and velvet. But sometimes, in the spaces between meetings, when he thought no one was looking, she'd catch glimpses of something else. The way he'd press his fingers to his temple when exhaustion crept past his armor. The ghost of a smile when a deal went exactly right. The loneliness that flickered across his face for just a heartbeat before the mask snapped back into place. Those moments destroyed her. She knew she should quit. Every rational part of her brain screamed it. You're in love with a man who doesn't know you exist. You're torturing yourself. Leave. But every shift, she came back. Last Tuesday, Frank had passed within 3 feet of her bar. Close enough she could smell his cologne, that dark, expensive scent that made her pulse stutter. His eyes had swept the room with calculated precision, cataloging threats and opportunities. They'd slid right past her like she was made of glass. That night, Teresa had gone home and cried for the first time in months. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears that she was furious at herself for shedding. Friday morning, she'd woken up with a decision crystallized in her chest, like ice. This weekend. She'd give her notice this weekend. 2 weeks, professional. No explanation needed beyond pursuing other opportunities. She couldn't keep doing this to herself. She had no idea that by Friday night, everything would change. Friday night hit Club Sangre like a fever. Bodies packed tight, music bleeding through walls, the air electric with the kind of energy that came from money meeting danger on a dance floor. Teresa moved through it like water, hands steady as she built drinks with mechanical precision, her corner of the bar mercifully insulated from the main crush. She'd already decided. 2 weeks' notice. Sunday morning, she'd type it up, hand it to management Monday. Clean break, professional. She'd survive the heartbreak the way she survived everything else, quietly, efficiently, without making a scene. Teresa, you got a second? Miguel appeared at her bar, like he always did, tablet in hand, that easy smile softening the club's hard edges. Need to verify your liquor inventory before the weekend rush really hits. She welcomed the distraction. Sure, everything's logged, but I can walk you through it. She pulled up the digital checklist. We went through 3 bottles of Macallan last night. Mr. Morales had guests. Miguel scrolled through his tablet, shaking his head. Man drinks whiskey like it's water. Must be nice having business meetings that cost more than my car. He glanced at her with mock seriousness. You ever accidentally poison his drink? Just asking. For legal reasons. The laugh burst out of her before she could stop it. Genuine, unguarded, the kind of sound she'd forgotten she could make inside these walls. Her shoulders relaxed, her eyes crinkled at the corners. For just a moment, she wasn't invisible Teresa who loved a man who didn't see her. She was just herself. Miguel, if I poisoned every difficult customer, I'd be out of a job. Fair point, he grinned. But you gotta admit, the man tips well, but smiles never. Maybe he's got reasons, she heard herself say, surprising herself with the defense. This world doesn't exactly encourage trust. Across the club in the VIP section where shadows cost extra and secrets were currency, Frank Morales was mid-sentence when the sound hit him. Laughter. Light, genuine, alive in a way nothing else in his world was. His words died. The Castellano representative across from him kept talking, something about shipping routes and percentages, but Frank wasn't listening anymore. His attention had snagged on an unfamiliar sound, pulling his gaze across the club floor like a hook in his chest. There, his corner bar, the quiet one. A girl, dark hair pulled back, white shirt crisp despite the heat, was laughing. Really laughing, her whole face transformed, eyes bright under the neon red lights. And Miguel Santos, his floor manager, was leaning against her bar with the kind of casual ease that suggested this wasn't the first time. Something in Frank's carefully constructed control cracked clean through. He'd walked past that bar hundreds of times. Hundreds! How had he never— She smiled again at something Miguel said, and Frank felt it like a physical blow. Possessiveness flooded through him, raw and irrational and completely foreign. Jealousy, sharp as broken glass, at watching another man pull expressions from her that Frank hadn't even known existed. That smile should have been— what? His? He didn't even know her name. Mr. Morales? The Castellano rep's voice held an edge of confusion. The shipment terms? Frank stood abruptly, the movement cutting through the VIP section's careful atmosphere like a knife. We're done here. My associate will handle the details. But we haven't— We're done. The words came out cold, final, the tone that preceded violence in his world. Marco materialized at his elbow immediately, reading the shift in his boss like a seismograph detecting earthquakes. He followed Frank's line of sight, saw the bartender, saw Miguel, saw the dangerous set of Frank's jaw. Boss? Marco's voice was carefully neutral. Everything good? No. Frank's gaze never left Teresa. 6 months. She'd been here for 6 months, and he'd never seen her. Who is that? Marco didn't need clarification about who. Teresa Sanchez, bartender, been with us 6 months, clean background, good employee, keeps her head down. 6 months. The words echoed in Frank's head like an accusation. Miguel was leaving now, offering a casual wave. Teresa returned to her work, that smile fading back into the careful neutrality she wore like armor. And Frank watched her, really watched her, for the first time. Something shifted in his chest. Settled, decided. He'd spent 6 months not seeing her. That ended tonight. Saturday's shift started wrong. Teresa felt it the moment she walked through Club Sangre's back entrance, that electric tension that came before storms, the way prey animals sensed predators. Staff clustered in corners, voices dropping to whispers when she passed. Carlos avoided eye contact. Even the cleaning crew seemed nervous. Miguel was gone. Reassigned, someone muttered when she finally asked. Basement inventory. Overnight. Basement inventory was where careers went to die. Dusty stockrooms and outdated systems, as far from the club floor's money and prestige as you could get without being fired outright. A demotion so obvious it might as well have come with a scarlet letter. Teresa's stomach dropped. What happened? She replayed last night frame by frame. The inventory check, the stupid joke, her laugh. God, had she been too loud, too familiar? Had she somehow embarrassed Miguel in front of someone important? Guilt twisted through her chest. Miguel had been kind to her, treated her like a person, and now— Sanchez. Marco's voice cut through her spiral. Frank's right-hand man materialized at her bar mid-shift. Expression unreadable, a sealed envelope in his hand. Club letterhead, official. He placed it on the polished wood between them, didn't explain, didn't wait for questions, just walked away like he'd delivered a death sentence. Teresa's hands trembled as she picked it up. The envelope felt heavy, final. Around her, the club pulsed with its usual Friday chaos, but it all faded to white noise as she broke the seal. Notice of termination of employment. The words blurred. Her vision went hot, then cold. Termination. She was being fired. 6 months of perfect work. Never late, never complained, never made a single mistake that mattered. And now, what? Because she'd laughed? Because Miguel had been friendly? She didn't understand, couldn't make the pieces fit into anything that made sense. Pride was the only thing keeping her upright. Pride and the bone-deep knowledge that in Frank Morales's world, you didn't beg, you didn't ask for explanations. You took what was given and you left with whatever dignity you could salvage. Fine. If he wanted her gone, she'd go. The rest of her shift passed in a haze. She served drinks with mechanical efficiency, smiled at customers who didn't deserve it, pretended her world wasn't crumbling around her with every passing hour. When her replacement arrived for the late shift, Teresa cleaned her station with the same precision she'd used for 6 months, wiped down every surface, organized every bottle, left it perfect for whoever came next. You okay? Carlos asked, finally brave enough to approach. Fine. The lie tasted like ash. Just tired. Quiet goodbyes to confused coworkers who didn't know they'd never see her again. Her jacket from the back room. One last look at the bar that had been hers, at the club that had been her prison and her sanctuary both. The walk to the exit felt infinite. The club was nearly empty now. Just cleaning crews and shadows, the overhead lights dimmed to something almost gentle. Her footsteps echoed on polished floors. She could smell cleaning solution mixing with the ghost of expensive cologne and spilled liquor. Almost there. Almost free. Going somewhere, Teresa? She froze. The voice came from behind her, low, controlled, carrying the kind of authority that didn't need volume. A voice she'd heard 100 times from a distance but never directed at her. He'd said her name. Frank Morales knew her name. Frank Morales emerged from the shadows near his office archway, like something conjured from her worst and best fantasies. Perfectly dressed despite the hour pushing 4 a.m., dark suit immaculate, silver rings catching the dimmed lights. But it was his eyes that stopped her breathing, fixed on her with an intensity that felt physical, like he was cataloging every detail he'd missed for 6 months and refusing to miss another second. Mr. Morales, Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. She straightened her spine, forced steel into it. I got the envelope. I'm leaving. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath skin. That wasn't a termination. Confusion crashed over her in waves. Then what was it? A transfer. He said it like it was obvious, like it explained everything. To my personal staff. The air felt too thin suddenly. Personal staff. The people who worked directly for Frank Morales, who existed in his inner circle, who... I didn't request a transfer. I don't recall asking your permission. Cold, controlled, absolute. The voice of a man who didn't explain his decisions because he didn't have to. Anger sparked in Teresa's chest, burning through 6 months of careful invisibility. You can't just... Miguel. Frank cut her off, stepping closer. Still controlled but barely, something dangerous flickering beneath the surface. The floor manager, you seemed comfortable with him. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. You reassigned him because he talked to me? I reassigned him. There's a difference. That's insane. The words escaped before she could stop them. You didn't call Frank Morales insane. Not if you valued your safety. But she was past caring. He was doing his job. We were doing inventory. Is it? Frank's voice dropped, each word precise as a blade. Watching another man make you smile when I didn't even know you could? You didn't know because you never looked. 6 months of hurt poured out in those words, raw and unstoppable. 6 months, Mr. Morales. 6 months I've worked here, and you never saw me once. Not once. You think I didn't see you? The question stopped her cold. Something in his voice had changed. Still dangerous, but fractured now, control slipping like sand through fingers. Frank closed the distance between them, and suddenly the club felt impossibly small. I saw you every goddamn night. Every single one. I saw you arrive early, watched you work, noticed when you stayed late to help Carlos restock. His voice was low, rough, nothing like the cold authority she'd heard for months. I saw the way you tucked your hair behind your ear when you were concentrating, the little smile you gave customers who were polite, the way you dimmed whenever I got too close. Teresa's world tilted sideways. Understanding crashed over her in waves. The careful distance hadn't been ignorance, it had been deliberate. He'd been avoiding her the same way she'd been avoiding looking directly at him. Why? The word came out barely above a whisper. Because looking at you felt dangerous. Frank's hands flexed at his sides, those silver rings catching light. Because I've spent 10 years building control, and one bartender with sad eyes threatened all of it. Her heart was doing something painful in her chest. I was going to quit. His expression went deadly still. What? Tonight was supposed to be one of my last shifts. The confession spilled out, past pride, past fear. Not because of Miguel, because I couldn't keep pretending you didn't exist. Couldn't keep. She stopped, but they'd gone too far for half-truths now. Couldn't keep being invisible to someone I'd spent 6 months falling in love with. The silence that followed felt infinite. Frank stared at her like she'd just rewritten his understanding of reality. Say that again, he ordered, voice barely controlled. Teresa lifted her chin, met his eyes directly for the first time in 6 months. I love you. And I was leaving because staying was killing me. The silence that followed her confession felt alive, breathing, expanding, filling every corner of Club Sangre's empty space until Teresa thought she might suffocate on it. They stood frozen in the weight of what they'd both admitted, the dimmed lights casting shadows that made the moment feel stolen, sacred, dangerous. Frank moved. Not quickly. Each step was measured, predatory, the movement of a man who'd spent a lifetime learning control and was currently fighting every instinct that screamed at him to close the distance faster. Closer. Closer. Until he stood near enough she could smell his cologne, that dark, expensive scent that had haunted her for 6 months, could see the war raging behind his eyes. Control versus desire. Should versus want. Teresa didn't back away. 6 months of making herself small, of dimming her light so he wouldn't notice. She was done. She lifted her chin, met his gaze directly despite her heart trying to punch through her ribs. What do you want from me? Everything. The word came out rough, honest in a way that felt like a confession and a threat. Things I have no right to want, things that will put you in danger just by being near me. Then why? Her voice didn't shake, and she was proud of that. Why now? Why not just let me leave? Let me be safe somewhere you aren't? Frank's jaw worked, that muscle jumping again, his hands flexed at his sides like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. Because I can't. The admission sounded like it cost him. Because I saw you laugh yesterday, and I can't unsee it, can't unknow that sound. Can't pretend anymore that I don't. He didn't finish the sentence. His control shattered. One hand cupped her face, warm, calloused, surprisingly gentle despite the violence she knew those hands were capable of. The other found her waist, pulling her against him as his mouth crashed into hers with 6 months of repression and denial and desperate want. The kiss was possession, apology, desperation. Everything he couldn't say in words translated through the pressure of his lips, the way his fingers tangled in her hair, the low sound that rumbled from his chest when she gasped against his mouth. Teresa's hands found his chest, pressed against the expensive fabric of his suit. Her mind screamed at her to push away, to run, to remember all the reasons this was insane and dangerous and impossible. But her body had already made the choice her mind couldn't. Her fingers curled into his lapels, pulling him closer instead of pushing away, and she kissed him back with 6 months of her own longing and loneliness and love. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Frank kept her close. Forehead pressed to hers, his thumb tracing her jawline like he was memorizing the shape of her. You're mine now. His voice was low, absolute, carrying the weight of a vow and a threat. Do you understand? Mine. Every rational thought Teresa possessed screamed danger, screamed that men like Frank Morales didn't love, they owned. That his world was violence wrapped in expensive suits, that being his meant painting a target on her back in blood-red neon. But 6 months of loving him from a distance, of aching every time he walked past without seeing her, of knowing she'd rather have 5 minutes of being his than a lifetime of being safe and invisible. Yes, she whispered. She felt the shift in her bones, in the way the air around them changed density. She'd just become the obsession of a man who didn't know how to let go, who built empires out of ruthlessness and kept what was his with a grip that left marks. Frank's arms tightened around her. I'll keep you safe, no matter what it costs. The promise should have been comforting. Instead, it sent ice down her spine. Safe from everyone but you? His eyes met hers, dark, honest, holding nothing back. I'm the greatest danger you'll ever face. Teresa knew he was right. Knew she should run. should take this chance to escape before whatever this was between them consumed her completely. Instead, she kissed him again and sealed her fate. 3 days later, Teresa's entire world had been rewritten. Gone was the bar station, the familiar weight of bottles in her hands, the relative anonymity of the club floor. Now she sat at a desk outside Frank's office on the top level, sleek mahogany and leather, close enough to hear his voice through the door when he conducted business. Close enough that he could summon her with a word. Closer to him than anyone else in the organization. The stares followed her everywhere. Staff who'd barely noticed her existence now tracked her movements like she'd grown a second head. They saw the way Frank looked at her now. Possessive, hungry, like she was something precious he'd found in the rubble of his world and refused to let go. They saw his hand at her back when they walked through the club, the casual claiming and the gesture that announced ownership to anyone watching. She was learning his world from the inside now. The darker side, the part she'd only glimpsed from her safe distance at the bar. Meetings that ended with quiet threats delivered in Frank's controlled voice. Weapons displayed casually on desks like paperweights. The fear that flickered in people's eyes when they displeased him, a fear she was starting to understand was justified, and his obsession was growing. Frank couldn't go an hour without finding a reason to pull her into his office. A signature needed, a question about scheduling, excuses so thin they were transparent. But what he really needed was to see her, to touch her shoulder or catch her hand, to confirm she was real and still there, and hadn't disappeared like something his damaged psyche had imagined. Teresa adapted. Faster than she'd expected, she learned to read his moods, the tension in his shoulders that meant a deal had gone wrong, the rare softness around his eyes when they were alone, the split-second warning before his temper flared. She learned she could calm him with a look, ground him with her presence, exist in the dangerous space between his two worlds. The ruthless boss who commanded an empire built on fear, and the man who held her at night, like she was made of glass. Private dinners in his office after the club closed became their routine. Just them, expensive takeout, neither of them really tasted, his hands gentle, despite their capacity for violence. Learning each other in the quiet hours when the rest of Miami slept, and Club Sangre's neon finally went dark. On the fourth day, Frank told her about the security he'd installed at her apartment, the cameras, the reinforced locks, the driver assigned to take her anywhere she needed to go. "It's necessary," he said, his eyes dark with something that looked like worry, like fear, emotions she hadn't thought he was capable of. Teresa set down her wine glass. "What aren't you telling me?" His jaw tightened. "That making you mine painted a target on your back." The words hung between them, heavy with implications she was only beginning to understand. "Explain." Frank moved to the window overlooking the club, hands in his pockets, shoulders rigid. "In my world, weaknesses are currency. They're identified, catalogued, exploited." He turned to face her. "And everyone will see that you're my weakness." Teresa's pulse kicked up, but she kept her voice steady. "Then teach me." "What?" "Teach me how to survive in your world." She stood, cross to him. "I'm not fragile, Frank. I'm not going to break. But I can't protect myself if I don't know what I'm protecting myself from." Something shifted in his expression. Pride, maybe, mixed with reluctance. He wanted to keep her separate, safe, wrapped in bubble wrap and locked away where his world couldn't touch her. But they both knew that was impossible now. "Starting tomorrow," he finally said, "Marco will train you. Basic security, protocols, what to watch for." "What to watch for?" Frank's hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "People who'll want to hurt me by hurting you." From the shadows of Club Sangre's VIP section, someone watched. He'd been watching for 2 weeks now, ever since Frank Morales, Miami's untouchable king of controlled violence, had shattered his own rules for a bartender with dark eyes. Recording the way Frank's hand lingered at her back, the possessive glances, the complete, consuming focus that announced weakness louder than a billboard. His phone buzzed. A text. Report. He typed back quickly. She's the leverage. First real weakness in years. He'd burn his empire for her. The response came immediately. Good, keep watching, we move soon. 2 weeks into her new life, Teresa was learning fast. How to read a room's tension before violence erupted. Which exits to memorize first. How to spot the difference between genuine respect and the kind of deference that preceded betrayal. Marco was a patient teacher, running her through scenarios until her instincts sharpened, until she moved through Frank's world with something close to confidence. But theory was different from practice. The club event started normally. Business associates, expensive suits, deals negotiated over whiskey that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Teresa stayed close to Frank, playing her new role of assistant/something more, hyper-aware of every face in the room. She didn't see the threat until it was too late. Ms. Sanchez. The man appeared at her elbow. Expensive cologne, cold smile, hand extending to touch her arm before she could step back. You've caused quite the stir. Frank's distraction. The word dripped with implication. I do hope you're worth all this attention. The threat was veiled, wrapped in compliment, but she heard it clearly. So did Frank. 1 second he was across the room. The next, the man was pinned against the wall, Frank's forearm crushing his throat, murder written across every line of his body. Touch her again. Frank's voice was barely human, and I'll make sure they never find all the pieces. Boss, Marco appeared, already moving to intercept. Not here, not now. It took 3 of Frank's men to pull him back. The associate fled, gasping, terror replacing his earlier confidence. The room had gone deadly silent. Teresa watched Frank fight for control, watched his hands shake with the effort of not following through on the violence written in his DNA. This was what it meant to be his, complete, consuming, dangerous protection that didn't calculate consequences. She should have been terrified. Instead, her heart ached for the fear beneath his rage. Later, in the privacy of his office, Frank's hands were gentle as they cupped her face despite still trembling with adrenaline. If anything happened to you because of me, it won't. Teresa caught his wrists, held on. We'll be careful. You don't understand what you've become to me. What I do understand. She did now. Completely. The next morning, Marco cornered her outside Frank's office. People are watching, he said without preamble. Last night proved it. Someone will try to use you against him. You need to be ready. Her training intensified. Frank insisted on teaching her himself. Couldn't trust anyone else with her safety. Hours in the private range beneath the club. His hands steadying hers on the grip, his body pressed against her back as he corrected her stance, learning to shoot, to fight, to survive in a world that wanted to use her as a weapon against the man she loved. After one particularly brutal session, they were tangled together on the mat, her bruised and exhausted, him refusing to let her go despite Marco waiting outside with actual business that needed handling. I should let you go, Frank whispered against her hair. Give you your life back, before this destroys you. Teresa turned in his arms, met his eyes. Too late. I'm already yours. Across town, in a penthouse that overlooked the Miami skyline, a phone rang. Talk to me. The girl is the key. The watcher's voice was confident, pleased. She's his blind spot. When you're ready to move against Morales, she's how we do it. A pause. Then, perfect. Start planning. I want Frank Morales broken before we kill him. And the girl? Collateral damage. 1 month after the first kiss, they'd found a rhythm. Dangerous, obsessive, absolutely theirs. Club Sangre thrived under their combined influence, Teresa's quiet competence tempering Frank's brutal efficiency, his protection allowing her a confidence she'd never possessed before. She moved through his world now with her eyes open, trained and aware, no longer the invisible bartender, but not quite hardened enough to be one of his soldiers either. Something in between. Something entirely her own. Tonight, the club pulsed 3 floors below, but Frank's office felt removed from it all. Just them. Expensive whiskey neither was drinking. Miami's lights sprawling beyond the windows like fallen stars. Teresa caught her reflection in the dark glass. 6 months ago, she'd been invisible and safe, nursing a hopeless love from a distance. Now she was here, wrapped in the orbit of a man who looked at her like she was oxygen, and she didn't regret a single moment of the danger. "I'm going to marry you." Frank said it casually, like he was discussing the weather or tomorrow's meeting schedule. Not asking, telling. Teresa turned from the window, eyebrows raised. "Is that a proposal or an order?" "Both." His expression was serious, no hint of humor. "You're mine, Teresa. Might as well make it official." The laugh burst out of her, genuine, bright, the same sound that had started everything. Frank moved immediately, pulling her into his arms, his lips finding her temple. "There's that sound," he murmured against her skin. "The one that ruined me." She tilted her face up to kiss him properly, tasting whiskey and want and something that felt dangerously like forever. The door slammed open. Marco stood in the doorway, face grim, phone in hand. The shift in atmosphere was instant, deadly. "Boss, we've got a problem." Frank didn't let go of Teresa, but his entire body went rigid. "Talk." Castellano family. They've been asking questions about Teresa, specifically about her routines, her security, where she lives. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Teresa felt Frank transform beneath her hands. The lover disappearing, replaced by the Mafia boss who'd built an empire on calculated violence. His mind was already moving, planning, calculating threats and countermeasures with the precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime at war. "How good is your intel?" Frank's voice was ice. "Solid, 3 different sources confirmed." Marco's expression darkened. "Boss, they don't just want to hurt her. They want to take her. Use her as leverage against you." Something flickered across Frank's face, an emotion so raw and murderous that even Marco took a step back. "Then they've just signed their death warrant." Each word was precisely delivered, a promise wrapped in threat. Frank turned to Teresa, his hands framing her face with devastating gentleness that contradicted the death in his eyes. "No one touches you. I'll burn the city down first." Teresa met his gaze steadily, saw the war already forming behind his eyes, and felt something settle in her chest. Not fear, resolution. "We'll burn it together." "Teresa?" "No." She caught his wrists, held firm. "I'm not the invisible bartender anymore. I'm your woman, and I won't be anyone's victim." Pride flashed across Frank's face, mixing with the fear he'd never quite learned to hide when it came to her. Marco cleared his throat. "What are your orders?" "Double her security. No one gets within 10 feet without 3 layers of clearance. I want eyes on every Castellano property, every associate, every fucking janitor they employ." Frank's jaw tightened. "And get me everything we have on leverage. It's time to remind Miami why no one moves against me." They spent the next hour planning contingencies, safe houses, protocols. But eventually Marco left, and it was just them again, standing at the window overlooking the city that was about to become a battlefield. Frank's arm wrapped around Teresa's waist, pulling her against his side. Below them, Club Sangre's neon bled into the darkness like a wound. "I only noticed you when it was almost too late," Frank said quietly. "But now that I see you, now that you're mine, I'll kill anyone who tries to take you away." Teresa leaned into him, accepting the vow for what it was, a promise and a threat, love wrapped in violence. "I know. That's what scares me, and what makes me feel safest."